Right, so air filter done. Now onto the back brakes. Doing front and back brakes. Time to change the fluid, but also while we're at it, let's have a look at the pads and pistons and just have a quick general overhaul, maintenance check of what they're like. This bike doesn't get a lot of mileage. Fluid needs changing because it's time to change it. It's not because it looks dirty or anything else. But it's been in there at least 18 months, perhaps longer. I can't remember whether I actually changed the brake fluid when I bought this bike, so it's time to change it. Okay, so brake lever here pushes into the cylinder which runs up here, so has a pivot, so this pushes up, pushes into here, and fluid comes from the reservoir here, down this pipe, into the top here. As you push this down, it pushes fluid down this pipe that runs to the top of the caliper. So it's an overhead type caliper onto the single disc, and it's only got one, it's a solid disc, which means the caliper moves in and out to operate the brakes. You can see one pad, the outer pad, on this side by looking either up from here or up here with a torch, but this one in here you can't really see how much wear there is because the whole thing sits quite close. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this off. We're going to have a look at the pads, and we're going to bleed the brake. Okay, there's lots of different ways you can bleed brakes. You can get pressurized systems that put pressure onto the master cylinder and push the fluid through, but they're really more for cars and vehicles where you can't be operating the brake lever and doing this at the same time. You need two people, one sitting in the car pushing the. But on a bike, you can do it yourself, so not many people use those, I don't think. You can use a syringe and suck the brake fluid through. Some people prefer to push it, squeeze it and force it backwards through the system up to the reservoir. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way, by using the spanner, which is what I'm going to do. Alternatively, you can get these one-way systems. It's got a one-way valve in here, so you put the rubber hose onto there, you loosen it off, and you pump. And because it's got a one-way hose, a one-way valve in here, fluid only comes out. So when you push, the fluid comes out. When you let off, the valve closes, nothing comes back in. So it's a very quick and easy way of doing it. Lots of ways. I just like doing it the old-fashioned way, to be honest. So a container for the oil. Now this I will dispose of with the engine oil from the oil change I've just done. I've done the car as well just recently, so I need to go up to the tip and empty that because I've now got a couple of cans sitting in the garage. So that's not good. First of all though, I don't want to pump sitting in here at the moment. I've got a reservoir full of fluid and I don't really want to pump all of that old fluid through the system. So what I'm going to do is, there's a locking cap. Now in theory you would loosen this screw off here, but the head on this one is a bit past it, and since it doesn't want to come off at the moment, and it'll be a separate exercise to actually get that screw out, it will actually, if you just with two hands, okay, it will actually just pull back off. That stops the cap turning, and then it's simply a question. And I have to say, I'm suspicious I didn't change the back anyway. I think I might have changed the front fluid, but I didn't change the back. As a result, everything is really tight. I don't know who last did it, or if it's just function of time. There we go. Now, needless to say, make sure this is all clean before you do it, because otherwise you'll bring dirt into the system, which is the last thing you need, because that will seize your breakup. So, one cap. One flexible reservoir. This moves in and out as the fluid moves in and out, and it's quite grubby. And that fluid is horrible. I think I can say without any measure of doubt that I didn't change this when I bought the bike. I don't know how I didn't, but I didn't, and I can understand now why the back always has been a little bit spongy. Let me see if I can show you what that looks like. Right, there you are. Absolutely brown. And not only is it brown, there's little white particles floating in there, which is what I noticed on that rubber diaphragm that sits in the top. So yeah, I'd say this is well overdue for changing. I don't really want to pump all of that, especially when it's full of crap like that, through the system. So a syringe, you can get them from your pharmacist, chemist, whatever you want to call them, and simply, I have to say, because it's a bit awkward getting in there, I normally use the tube I use for bleeding just in there, and now bleed nipple is here, and what I found was that it didn't want to move when I tried it a moment ago, and when that happens I dislike these multi-point spanners because they have a tendency to chew the nuts to pieces. So I switched to a 6-sided socket which fits on there precisely, and then you can just crack it off. Doesn't need to be much, but it's work it through a little bit. So that should not, it's a steel thread into, looks like an alloy body. It's a really good quality alloy normally, but even so, they do tend to rust a bit, so I think these are sometimes a bit sacrificial. They're quite a soft steel. Alright, so now we're done. I can use my spanner. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some fluid into the reservoir. And you can check your manual, but it also will tend to say on the lid here, and it says use only .4 brake fluid from a sealed container. So .4 from a sealed container. Why a sealed container? Well, it's not that hard, is it, monkey boy, as Dale would say. Brake fluid's hygroscopic. That means it absorbs water from the atmosphere. It's one of the main reasons why we need to change it from time to time, even if it looks nice and clean and ready to be used. Spilling it everywhere. Some spills are inevitable, so we might as well anticipate them. Right, now that's a much nicer colour. So, spanner in place, apply pressure, open, close, and there we go. Close, let off, Now it's starting to pump through a little bit. I can now hit peeing into the bottle, and I can see the reservoir dropping. Now we need to pump the whole pathway through. That's all the way, this hose here, all the way down through the from the reservoir all the way down to the master cylinder, all the way through this hose. So I want to get at least a couple of reservoirs of fluid through. So I'll come back to you when I think I'm done with that. I've pumped 2 reservoirs and a little bit more through. The brake pedal is now absolutely rock solid. When I press it, I can't see whether there's any air bubbles coming through because I'm using a black hose. You're better off with a clear one, but it's solid, so I'm happy with that. Now, the only thing I didn't mention when coming through on the front is the level of reservoir, or the level of fluid in the reservoir itself. Because you need to get this diaphragm back into there. If this is full of fluid, then when you try and put this diaphragm in, it takes up space, and it'll overflow all over your bike. So it's a good idea to check where that should be. Of course, the problem is as your pads wear down, the fluid will actually drop, because some of the fluid that is now pushing your pads out further is in the pipework. If you put new pads in, you push the pads back in, it pushes, or as you push the pads out, or even to remove them, it pushes the fluid back up through the pipe and back into the reservoir. So if you've got this sitting at nice at full, it'll push fluid out. If that doesn't make any sense, it will, don't worry. Bear in mind, the bike is leant to the left, so if we sit the bike back upright, that fluid level, which appears to be low, will come back up. So that looks about right to me. We'll find out in a moment. So let's keep it all clean. Put that back in. Let's feed that diaphragm down in. There we go. So it's now popped. So now you can see, well, you might not be able to see, but that level has increased. There we go. Get back on there, just tight. Don't, you know, that doesn't be more than it needs to be, monkey boy. Now, I just need to actually get this lined up so that, I'm not quite sure what you call it. There we go. A bit over tight. There we go. That now locks in there. That's not going to come undone by itself. So, tight. Hose off. Oops. That drain. And so this doesn't need to be tight in there, because that's really not its function. clean off any brake fluid that might have escaped. Dot 4, generally speaking, isn't that good for your paintwork, so I advise you to be careful if you care about your paint. And let's get this nice and clean.